If I could turn on the mic. So, Peggy Shepard and Richard Moore will join us up here, I presume. And they are the current co-chairs of the White House Council on Environmental Justice. They have been doing that important work over these last 4 years, but it didn't start there. It started many years ago. Peggy and I were talking, and we both tried to hedge on when we actually both got into this work, just because I'm vain and I'm not sure why Peggy didn't hedged. But it's work that's been going on since even before it had a name. Right? Environmental justice has been part of the project of healing the earth and making sure that the gains that we're making in environmental quality are available to everyone. I date my involvement in it back to 1987, which means I'm old. But these folks have been doing it even longer. So Peggy Shepard, Richard Moore. If I gave you their full biographies, they wouldn't have a chance to say anything. Right? Let me just say that these are two of the original leaders in the environmental justice movement. And back when the first National People of Color Environmental Justice Conference was held in 1991, right? It was when what seemed like scattered pieces of work around the country came together and coalesced, and the recognition that it wasn't just the local action that was being done, but it was work that was being done across the country, in every community, in Native communities, in poor communities, and they laid out what the agenda for environmental justice ought to be. They created the 17 principles, which maybe we'll make a copy of and make available before the end of the conference. And then advised me when I was in government and had the chance to try to put into regulatory language in the form of an executive order what the environmental justice movement was talking about. And the one thing I would say that it taught me, and we'll talk about this, I hope, is that for someone who came at it from the perspective of an environmental lawyer, I had a conception of what protecting the environment was about, or even what an environmental issue was. When you meet with environmental justice communities across the country, you learn that the vision you had, or what I learned was, that the vision I had was crabbed and narrow and didn't accurately capture those things that ought to be part of the concern of people who want to protect the environment and protect the health of the people of this planet. So with that, I want to introduce Richard Moore, Peggy Shepard, and what we're going to do, is there a timekeeper? We'll get you one. Okay, good. Michael just knows I need it, right? But I want to make sure we don't run over too long. What I want to do is essentially have a conversation about environmental justice. The first thing I want to know, right, is what has the work you've been doing on the White House Advisory Council been? And what have been the main focuses that you've tried to direct the current administration in when you think about environmental justice? Richard, let's start with you.
Thank you, Joe. Am I on here?
If it's green, you're on.
There we go.
Good.
Well, I just wanted to begin just by responding. Just take it. Let me just stand up for a second.
Okay, absolutely.
All right. Can we take a deep breath this morning? You know, it's been not only a long flight for us to get here. We come in from Albuquerque, New Mexico. The co-coordinator of Los Jardines Institute, the Gardens Institute in Albuquerque, is here, Dr. Sofia Martinez. And it's been a long journey, and we all realize that. I do have to say this and respond to the question that there's several things I think that as we begin this morning to engage in the hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of years that's of what brings us into this convening together, is that I just wanted to make this comment that was made to me or made to us after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. And for those of you that remember that Dr. King and many of our other sisters and brothers called for a national mobilization on Washington, D.C. that was referred to as the Poor People's Campaign. And I'm saying that in response to where we are today and the hundreds upon hundreds of years of our sisters and brothers in struggle. That this political significance and the personal significance of what brings us together. And I had to really kind of think about this. I said, am I in joy? Yes, to some extent, I have to say that I am, and part of that is because we're here together this morning. And not only then, based upon that, are we seeing some of our friends that we've seen not only at the First People of Color Summit, but for many, many years before that, of the United Church of Christ and others that we've made relationships with. And I bring up that moment of the Poor People's Campaign because for many that remember that we're a part of that, that mobilization as we traveled from various locations all over this country to come to Washington, D.C. And then for many of our sisters and brothers that were housed around the Lincoln Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, and that was referred to as Resurrection City, for those that remember. And that when we returned back, many of us to New Mexico, after travel and several months of being in Washington, our elders called us to a small rural community in northern New Mexico. And they said, young sisters and brothers, with all respect, we invite you to come to be with us for several days and to prepare ourselves mentally and physically and work in a potato cooperative that was there. And 3.5 or 4 days later, after working in the fields together, laughing together, sharing stories together, in the evenings, the tortillas would come out, the beans, the red chili and the green chili. New Mexico, as you all know, have the best of chili anywhere in this country. And so based upon that, and the music would come out, and the stories would come out, and the bonfires, and the joy, the real joy of celebrating and being together. But they said to us 3.5 days later, with all respect, sisters and brothers, that trip that you took to Washington, was that just for your resume? Was that something that was for a moment in time? Or is that something in terms of what we shared and we learned and we struggled together in terms of making that trip move forward? Is that something that will be a part of your life for the rest of your life? And they said, sisters and brothers, we ask you to never forget 3 things that we're going to leave with you. And I want to start this and engage in this discussion with leaving you with those 3 things. One, they said, never forget where you come from. Always remember where you came from, and place does matter. The other thing that was said to us was never forget those that have given up their lives to make it possible to be around this bonfire this evening. And I'm saying this to you. Let's never forget those that have given up their lives to make it possible for us to be in this convening today. Those sisters and brothers that were liberation strugglers for generation upon generation, whether it be Asian Pacific Islander, Native American, Native Indigenous, African American, Latino, others, poor working class white folks from Appalachia and from other communities throughout this country. Let's never forget those that have given up their lives, our family members, our neighbors, our leaders of grassroots organizations and other institutions. Let's never forget those that have given up their lives to make it possible for us to be here. Never forget that. And then additionally they said to us was, let's always give back to others what's been given to you. And I think that's what we're doing today. I think that that's what you're doing. That's what we're doing. That's what we've been a part of in the struggle. So I just had to say that because we could have thought when we went around the room and we could have named Jean Gauna. I mean, we could went on with sisters and brothers that have given up their lives to make it possible for us to be here. The creation and the development of the environmental and economic justice movement in this country. And so with that said then, did I ever expect that I would be chair of the White House Council on Environmental Justice? I will say, and I think Peggy and I for all the years, and Gerald and others, I should say to you that I chaired the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council under the Clinton administration. I should also say I was the first elected chair of the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council. Those that are familiar with the Federal Advisory Committee rules know you're not elected, that the administrator appoints you in those particular positions. I'm just sharing some of that not to pat myself on the back, because anything that I've been involved in, I've never done by myself, just like many of you that have founded institutions and others. It was us getting together, 1 or 2 of us, and talking about ideas and how can we move this forward and how can we move this forward and so on. And so it's never really been about I, and it's really not about I right now, because unless we make it the we and stand firm that we ain't putting up with about what our people are getting ready to be imposed upon. For many of us, we come out of the Nixon administration. I'm going to tell you, as a young person like many of you, we lost 5 members of our organization. I want to be very clear about that in the 60s. For us that have went through the military repression, the police repression, and much of those other repressions, oppressions, and whatever that were imposed upon, systemic racism, sexism, homophobia, you name it, we've went through it, and we're getting ready to go through another one of those moments in our lives that if we don't pull ourselves together and put our egos outside the door, not in the door or in this room, if we don't learn rapidly how important it is for us to work together as sisters and brothers in this struggle, whether we come from grassroots communities, whether we come from the academic communities, whether as we come together as federal employees, many of those federal employees that have given up their lives to make it possible for us to be in this room also. So I say that to you because I want to respond to the question, but I have a lot on my mind, just like you all in this room. You know, we went through 2 snowstorms to get here. One in New Mexico where it was 3 inches of snow, and we've been in a drought for 15, 20 years in New Mexico now. Then we went on to Denver, Colorado, with a foot of snow, and so that delayed us in terms of getting here, but we're here. So now, then I'm going to respond back. One, that my mother said, and I'll repeat what my mother said, because many ask me, who is your primary mentor? And I've been fortunate enough throughout these years of getting ready to turn 80 years old here fairly soon, that I've had women and men mentors, some of the best in this country and in the world. And I'm honored to have had those mentors, that I will never forget them that gave up their lives to make it possible for us to be here. So then saying with that then, my mother said, son, be careful what you ask for because you just might get it. So what does that mean in a short version when we talk about the White House Council on Environmental Justice very quickly? We that have been engaged in struggle, the broader we, I think, and as the comment was made earlier, I do come from an organization, I'm co-coordinator of Los Jardines Institute, the Gardens Institute. We're farmers. We run a farm. We have a farmers cooperative. There's over 74 organizations that are members of our cooperative in New Mexico. And I say that in my mom's reference because I think that we've been engaged in this struggle and we had some expectations that we would like to have seen the Biden administration incorporate. Maybe many of you that don't know the history of environmental justice. Now, I'm keeping it very brief. It's not easy to go over 500 years, way over 500 years in 2 minutes. You know what I'm saying? And I'm going to keep it brief, very brief. But I want to say this so that history will correct itself. That if we want to continue to engage in these discussions, and if we want to continue to build the kind of movement that's necessary to go through this process we're about ready to be imposed upon, then based upon that we need to study the history of environmental and economic justice, the intersections between civil rights, and then we would have to know, and in many of our histories, it's the churches that were there in the beginning of where we come from in the roots of the environmental and economic justice movement, because for many of us, we come out of the civil rights movement and those intersections. And so I do got to say, Gerald, and that there was a discussion that took place with the president, then Vice President Biden. About 10 or 12, Peggy, I think, of us that were engaged in that discussion. And so one of those things was that setting the table straight in terms of history is that we said to President Biden now, this ain't a game that we're playing here. This is not just a discussion that we're having. If this is just one of those little speeches that you want to try to give us because you're running for President of the United States, then you're wasting your time and we're wasting ours. You want to get down to some serious business, then let's have a serious discussion. And you make some serious commitments. And so we call them demands, you may call them recommendations, but they're demands. And so based upon that, the White House Council was a piece of what took place in that discussion, Peggy, because what we said is that we want environmental and economic justice lifted to the highest level of this administration. The highest level of this administration. And that was partially the beginning of then what would become and has become the White House Council on Environmental Justice. So I want to end with this comment about the White House Council. Well, one, I will say that President Biden, although there has never been a president in my lifetime, or a governor or a mayor or many other city council members or county commissioners or parish leaders or whatever, that we've agreed on everything. And we have not agreed on everything with this administration, to make it very clear. But I will tell you something. A lot of what we asked for, we got. And that's why I say, my mother said, be careful what you ask for because you might get it. So based upon that, this is the only administration in my lifetime that had not only made a commitment to environmental and economic justice, but put, as we would say, the money where the mouth is. And that's very, very important for us to understand. So, and lastly, as I turn this over, the White House Council has made incredible steps forward through this period of time, under very challenging moments and frustrating moments. Some of the recommendations, you all are aware of them and so on, that have been made. It's an advisory council. We learned the hard way. At one particular point many, many years ago, we made a commitment, a promise that we would never be on advisory committees anymore because we had a misunderstanding. And then one day we had an advisory council meeting and we had some deep discussions about some things and that were asked for us. And then we saw several weeks later or whatever, responses, and we said, but nothing that we gave advice to had been accepted or mentioned. So we made many decisions in our lives that we're not going to be on advisory councils no more. We're only going to be on a planning committee, and we're only going to be on a committee that makes every decision about everything and participates in all those decisions, whether it's money, staff, whether it's policy, principles, the ways we're going to work together, how decisions are going to be made, and so on. But then we conceded. I conceded, and it became part of an advisory council, the White House Council. But I will say to you as I turn it over, many of the recommendations that were made by the White House Council on Environmental Justice on the Advisory Council were implemented into the policies of the Biden administration. So that's an honor for me, Gerald, and I want to leave it there because that's an honor for me to say that. And I want us to understand that. And I'll lastly say, as I turn it back over, is that based upon that, that wasn't just made by the 26 members of the White House Council. Those were hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of sisters and brothers all over this country, and partially the world, but all over this country, that made recommendations to us to make recommendations to the council itself. So I just wanted to thank you all on behalf of ourselves and our family members and those that have given up their lives to make it possible to be here. Struggle don't come easy, and it's far from over, and we ain't giving up nothing. We ain't moving backward, we're moving forward, but let's move forward together. Thank you very much.
Now, when Peggy helped found the West Harlem Environmental Action, she and I were talking earlier and said, it felt when you're putting something together like that, it feels like it's just your community, right? But the recognition that it's not just your community has led Peggy to become one of the national leaders in environmental justice, and because of that, she was named to the White House Council. So I'd like to get your reflections and on your work that led there or your work on the council, because a lot of people don't understand, I think, what those advisory councils do, right? And so having some explanation about what they actually do, I think would be useful.
Well, yeah. I would just give Richard some props and say the Southwest Network for Environmental and Economic Justice was the strongest network in the country. Early on, we had regional networks. And they were always focused on the EPA. They had this EPA campaign. And I was like, why are they just focused on the EPA? And the outcome of that was the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council. I did become the first woman chair.
I was a mere member.
We don't have the first woman president yet, but I was the first woman chair. And that was a model for the WEJAC, for the White House EJoy Advisory Council. And we've been working our asses off for the last 2.5 years. Richard and I have had like 3 meetings a month. There are also work groups working on scoring how every agency in the administration is doing, because there's supposed to be a whole of government approach to Justice 40. And of course, Justice 40 is about 40% of the benefits of the investments in clean energy should go to communities of color, environmental justice communities. And so we have been trying to figure out how to develop a score for every agency around that. And also, what all of us need to be doing is understanding how that money is, how and where that money is coming into our communities. Because billions of dollars are coming from the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the BIL for infrastructure. They're coming into our communities, but we don't know where that's all going. There's no one tracker, and we've got to make sure that we track that money, where it's gone, and who it's gone to. So again, the WEJAC has been very important in terms of developing the executive order and the new executive order that Biden did again last year. So we have been developing recommendations for all of that. But of course, we probably have had our last WEJAC meeting. And so, what are we going to do now? What I think happened in the last couple of years is that we were out-organized. We're organizers who were out-organized. We sat and laughed at these rallies and these crazy folks that we thought, but behind the scenes, there was a little group figuring it all out, developing that 2025, plan. And so we watched this ragtag band almost have a coup and now elected a president. And we sat by and we did not organize against that. And so, to me, that is one of the things that happened. Another thing that's happened is that if any of you all have gotten funds from the IRA, you may be investigated. So you want to make sure that your 990s, your 501c3s, all of that is in place. My organization has already been named in Republican blogs and newspapers about a WEJAC person who's gotten some of these funds. And so many of us are going to be investigated. So I just want you all to know to shore up all of your structure in your organizations if you've received any of these funds. And so I believe that we have a lot of opportunities. And in order to really develop those opportunities, we've got to come together. As environmental justice folks, some of us don't talk to each other. Some of us don't want to share information because that may mean that we go and get more money than somebody else because resources have been so tight. We have been able to begin working with the green groups. We have something called the Equitable and Just National Climate Platform, where 12 green groups and 6 green groups and 12 environmental justice organizations have been working together for the past 3 or 4 years. And that's begun to make a difference. But right now, green groups, EJoy groups, academics, legal folks, we've all got to come together because we have an incredible challenge. And we're going to have this challenge intensified over the next 4 years. So we've got to come together as green groups, as stakeholders, and because, some of us don't have that many resources, and most environmental justice groups are very, very small. They may have a $500,000 budget. So again, we've got to come together with the resources, with the skills, to really push back. And that's where the joy comes. The joy is in resistance. The joy is in knowing that we're going to develop a campaign, we're going to develop initiatives that are going to push back and ensure that our communities are not further harmed. And so there are a lot of actions we're going to have to take.
One of the things that both work on the NEJAC and work on the White House Council illustrate, I think, is that there's a complex network of environmental justice advocates. So how would you take what you've learned from the work on the council to help invigorate or revivify those networks and make sure the networks keep developing and keep delivering for the people that they were created to serve?
Well, one of the action steps that can come out of this conference, Mr. Michael, is that people start signing up. We need to immediately begin organizing. We need to immediately develop networks and working groups. We need a working group on the legal analysis. We need a working group on the community organizing. We need a working group on the fundraising. And philanthropy has got to be able to think differently. Because now, all of these funds, all of the federal funds, they will not be there for our initiatives and for our communities. Philanthropy has got to fill that gap, and they've got to begin to think differently about resourcing a highly under-resourced movement and resourcing grassroots groups who aren't doing much. I was talking to one of our colleagues here from Lake Charles, Louisiana, and she said, you know, I've been working for 20, 30 years on this issue, and nobody knows my name. Nobody, you know, life has not changed for us. And so, again, philanthropy has got to do better, and they've got to understand that they've got to resource the least of us who are the most overburdened in our communities.
Yeah, Gerald, if I can follow up on that. One, and thank you for opening it up, Peggy. I had to get some off my chest. I didn't get everything off my chest, as you can imagine. You know. But I want to, Gerald, I want to respond. One, I think, is from the academic side. Is I think one of the positiveness of even the Justice 40 and some others was the requirement, I'll call it, that on Justice 40, that academic institutions and others could only take 20% of the thing. We have a university in New Mexico that would take 50 or 60%. I don't know about you all. I'm just talking about, you know. But if we applied for a grant together or whatever, that the university would take 50 to 60%. And community change grants and some others was requiring only 20%. But I wanted to just say this, mandating. One, as academic institutions, one of the primary things is a learning lesson I think that we need to move forward with is that let us speak for ourselves, okay? So we need the data, we need the research, we need the students, we need all of that, you know. But let us speak for ourselves, and we'll define our own history, you know. We don't know nobody interpreting our history for us. We want to interpret our own history. That's number one. Number two, I think that students need to understand that all of that what you're doing, we need it, okay? The research, the data, the commitment, the dedication, and all of that, we need that, and we need to work together as brothers and sisters in this struggle. The others is university institutions. As I said, let us speak for ourselves. Don't start speaking for us and start writing our history and doing all kind of things, and our history gets misinterpreted. The other thing is, sisters and brothers, don't let no institution pit us against each other, from African Americans, Native Indigenous, Latinos, Asian Pacific Islanders. Don't let no institution, whether it's a government institution or an academic institution or whatever, pit us against each other. We allowed some of that to happen. And some of it was intentional, and some of it was unintentional. And history will truly speak for itself when it comes down to that. I think the other thing that's crucial is that our people should get degrees too, whether in fact at the end of the day, whether we come to the institution, because we've spent hundreds upon hundreds of years of doing things, somebody give some respect to our sisters and brothers and give them an honorable PhD or something. Not just a pain in the ass. I think that's another one. Peggy, thank you very much. When it comes to resources, don't put us on the end of the resources. Put us in the resource discussion together. Yeah. So let's not forget that. Peggy touched on it. I think the other is we're going to have to occupy, demonstrate, protest, take over, do whatever we need to do to make sure that our voices are heard. Now there's another side of that strategy. Yes, we need to stay on the streets. We're going to stay on the streets, okay? But the other side of that is that we need to be on the streets and we need to be inside just as much as we're outside doing what we're doing, and we need to be able to be doing it together. That's very, very important. The strategies of where we move forward at. They used our language against us. Right to work. Well, hey, everybody, when that was all being discussed, Gerald, right to work. Well, yeah, we have a right to work, but who started using all of that? Who started using even some of our own language against us and so on? So I think there's a whole series of things. And we that are a part, the we in a very broad we, as I say that, Peggy touched on the piece. We need to tighten up our communications with each other. We need to sit down with respect as sisters and brothers in order to be able to move this process and this work forward. So let's do that. Second, lastly, or not last of the many things, no one needs to appoint our leadership. We will appoint our own leadership, okay? Our leadership comes out of the rank and file of our movement, and it's decided by us. So we don't need no foundation telling us who our leadership is, and so on. We will let all the world know who our leadership is, because they will be speaking not for themselves, but they will also be speaking for us. And just lastly, just to say this, always keep connected internationally with what's happening locally. It's not just rhetoric we're talking about. Some of the same transnational and multinational corporations that have been poisoning our people over and over again for years and years are doing it not only in this country, but they're doing it in other places, and you know that throughout the world. We need to connect and continue to connect with our sisters and brothers and work together throughout the world. That's academic folk, that's grassroots organizers, and so on. And some foundation at the end of the day, then as I said, then don't let the intergenerationalness of our movement, we didn't need nobody writing about why it was important for young people to be working with elders, with adults, with our children, and so on, because we've been taught it by our parents, okay? For generations upon generations. So let's not allow the lack of intergenerationalness that sometimes has impacted us on by. We will stand beside each other. We will not stand behind each other. We will stand beside each other in this struggle, and we need to tighten up, sisters and brothers, young sisters and brothers. Let's work together. We got some stubborn-ass elders. You know a few of them? Hey, what can I tell you? But I also know some stubborn-ass young people, okay? And actually, if Sophia and I talk, we got a few of them in our own family. But, so that's what I say in terms of all of this and so on. Gerald, let's just do it together. That's what I'm saying. But strategically, it's got to be done strategically. Thank you.
And we've got to move on to the next session. But what I want to say is, there are a number of things that grew out of the environmental justice movement that informs the way we do our work, and whether we're doing our work inside the academy or whether we're doing our work outside the academy. One thing, and I'm glad you're here actually in this auditorium, because one thing that this school stands for is the critical commitment to interdisciplinarity. One thing you learn from the environmental justice movement is that you have to have a number of perspectives on any particular problem to be able to see that problem from all of the sides that you need to see it in order to formulate a solution. When I met with EJ leaders way back in 92, right, the breadth of what ought to be considered an environmental issue is far broader than what the environmental professionals were saying it was. And it's that transformation that led us to integrate public health at every moment. So the public health school is important, the public health research here, the epidemiology that we do here, the data gathering that we do here, all of that is critical for moving forward. And you need to value that kind of work. We need to value the lessons of working together across different ways of knowing that the EJ movement exemplifies. And with that, we can create a solution that actually speaks to the real problems. Okay. So I hope that working together, joining hands together, linking hands together, thinking about things from the various perspectives we come from, recognizing, and I want to stress this, that, it's a cliche, and I appreciate it's a cliche, right? But we do stand on the shoulders of the people who came before us. And we need to recognize that and continue to honor that and recognize that we're no smarter than they were. And if we have any more knowledge, it's because of the knowledge they shared with us going forward. And we need to produce the knowledge that the people coming after us are going to use and make part of the powerful elements of change that we need to see going forward. So thank you for joining us today. Let's get the day going. Thank you.